Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we're doing our second batch of spoilers from the Warhammer 40k Commander deck. So without further ado, let's get started. We're starting out with Zoanthrope, an X colorless, 1 blue, 1 red, creature Tyranid. It's a 0/0 and it has Ravenous, which is the keyword for the Tyranids. This creature enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, draw a card when it enters. And then it has Flying, Ward 2, and when Zoanthrope enters the battlefield, it does X damage to any target. So this seems quite decent. Being able to hit something for X when it comes in is a decent piece of removal if you sink enough mana into it. My concern with the Tyranids is that there's so many of these X cards that eventually it's going to put a pretty heavy strain on your mana. We've so far seen one card that can help with this, which is the Saga that was spoiled yesterday, but we'll see if there's more enablers, because otherwise it's going to be a pretty clunky deck to play, I feel. Next up is Exocrine. It is 3 colorless, 1 green, it's a creature Tyranid, and it's a 2/4 with Reach and Death Touch and Hypertoxic Miasma. All lands have tap, add 1 color of any color, and lose all other abilities. So this is some nice land hate. If you're playing in a deck that doesn't really have that many utility lands, this can be pretty good. It can turn off all of the Nykthos and Cabal Coffers and all of that nonsense. It also turns off Reliquary Towers, it turns off any kind of recursion land, any kind of flip land that comes from the Ixalan block, so this is just really solid, I think. Next up is Homogorn Tord. For X colorless and 1 green, it's a creature Tyranid 1/1. It has Ravenous, which we just mentioned. It has Endless Swarm. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 colorless and 1 green. If you do, return Homogorn Tord from your graveyard to your hand. Not much to say here. This is just a recursive threat, but it's really slow. I don't think this is going to be particularly good. I suppose there can be some combo potential if you cast it for 1 green, but still, the fact that you have to pay 3 to get it back, it's probably not going to be great. Next up is one of the coolest ones, Ghyrson Stonekeller Morph. For 1 colorless, 1 blue, 1 red, it's a legendary creature, Tyranid human, 3/2, it has Ward 2, that's really nice, and then it has 3 auto stubs. Whenever another source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player, Ghyrson Stonekeller Morph deals 2 damage to that permanent or player. This seems like it's going to be super sweet. It's going to work really well in a deck with pingers and small creatures that can hit for 1 and then basically hit for 3. Somebody mentioned that putting Death Touch on Ghyrson means all of your 1-power creatures now have Death Touch, so that's really sweet too. So this is going to be best friends with Basilisk Collar for sure, because it's also going to gain you a ton of life. But something that I haven't seen people mentioning as much is how this works with some kind of hate effects. Mana Bobs is going to be super sweet with this, particularly if you can give it some life gain so it doesn't deal damage to you. Every time anybody taps a land, they're going to take 3 damage. That just seems really evil and really sweet. There's so many possibilities to brew with this card, and I can't wait. This is an awesome one. I really want to make a deck around this. Next up, we have Biophagus. For 1 colorless, 1 green, it's a creature human Tyranid wizard, 1/3, and then it has Genomic Enhancement. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. If this mana is spent to cast a creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. This is just a very nice mana rock, essentially, in Commander that's going to work really well in any counter synergy deck by giving the stuff an extra counter. This goes straight into my Vorel of the Hulkblade deck, and it just seems really solid. Next up is Genestealer Patriarch. For 4 colorless and 1 blue, creature Tyranid. It's a 4/4 and it has Genestealer's Kiss. Whenever it attacks, put an infection counter on target creature defending player controls. And then Children of the Cult. Whenever a creature with an infection counter on it dies, you create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a Tyranid in addition to its other types. This is super dirtly and super silly, but it could have some potential. It could be some fun. It's never going to be ultra competitive because it requires him to attack and then you to kill that creature that you put a counter on. And since you can only target your opponent's creatures with the attack trigger, then you're not really going to be able to be sacrificing stuff for shenanigans. So there don't seem to be many ways to exploit this, but still, fun card. Next up is Tyranid Harridan. For 4 colorless, 1 green and 1 blue, it's a creature Tyranid with Flying, Ward 4, it's a 4/4, and it has Shrieking Gargoyles. Whenever Tyranid Harridan or another Tyranid you control deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 blue Tyranid Gargoyle creature token with Flying. This is pretty good because Ward 4 makes it really difficult to kill. And it's kind of a self-contained engine, because even if you just have this on the board, if they don't have any blockers, it's going to make a token the first turn, and then those tokens are also Tyranids, so when they deal damage, they're going to make more tokens. So this is going to grow exponentially, because every time you're going to be doubling your tokens for each token that can connect. That just seems really sweet. And the Ward 4 is very annoying to remove. Next up we have Winged Hive Tyrant for 3 colorless, 1 blue and 1 red. It's a creature Tyranid, 4/4, flying and haste, and the will of the Hive Mind. Other creatures you control with counters on them have flying and haste. That's really cool. It needs a very specific deck to be good. It's probably only going to really be good in this Tyranid precon, but giving everybody flying and haste is pretty sweet. There's probably some combos this can enable in other decks by giving creatures with activated abilities haste if they have a counter on them. That being said, this is just a solid card for the Tyranid precon. Next up is Nexus for 1 colorless and 1 green. It's a creature human Tyranid advisor, and it's a 2/2 with strategic coordinator, which is basic lands you control have tap, add colorless, spend this mana only on costs that contain X. This is a really good one because it gives it to all your lands. This is a kind of enabler I was talking about before, because Tyranids have so many X costs, so you're going to need some way to make a lot of mana, otherwise it's going to be super clunky. This is great. It's also really good in any Hydra tribal deck because you have so many X costs. This is going to be really sweet in quite a few different decks, and it just feels like it's going to see a lot of play even outside of the precons, which is really nice. The fact that it gives it to all your lands and you can tap them immediately means you can have some pretty explosive turns out of nowhere. Next up is Exocrine, which is X colorless, 2 colorless and 1 red for a creature Tyranid 2/2. It has Ravenous, which we've already mentioned, and it has Bioplasmic Barrage. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each player and each other creature. So it's a board wipe on a stick. That's pretty nice if you can find a way to pump its power. It's also a good way to finish the game. If you're at a higher life total than your opponent and you can make a lot of mana, this just wins out of nowhere. Really solid card. Next up we have Gargoyle Flock for 2 colorless, 1 green, 1 blue. It's a creature Tyranid gargoyle with flying. It's a 2/2 and it has Sky Swarm. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, create a 1/1 blue Tyranid gargoyle creature token with flying. So this is fine. This is just like a little token enabler. It's going to make 1 token per turn. Not the most exciting card in the world, but it's nice to have another way to get small Tyranids out, which can then like trigger all of your other Tyranid abilities. Just really sweet. Next up is Haruspex for 3 colorless, 1 green. It's a creature Tyranid. It's a 2/2. It has Rapacious Hunter. When another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Haruspex and Devouring Monster, which is tap, remove X +1/+1 counters from Haruspex. Add X mana of any 1 color. I think this one has some serious potential in sacrifice decks or aristocrat decks. The fact that it triggers off of any creature token or not that's either yours or your opponent's means that it's going to get really big really quickly, and then you can use those counters to add mana. This can do a lot of nasty stuff in Counters Matters deck as well, so this feels like it can have homes in multiple different places, and a lot of these cards are just really good and really unique and pushed, so I'm quite impressed so far with the quality of some of the cards. Next up is Hierophant Bio Titan for 10 colorless and 2 green. It's a creature, a Tyranid, a 12/12. It has Frenzied Metabolism. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each counter removed this way, and has Vigilance, Reach, and Ward 2. And then it's Titanic. Hierophant Bio Titan can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So this is really good. It's going to stonewall everything with Vigilance and Reach, and it's kind of hard to remove with the Ward 2. Obviously a 12/12 is amazing, and it can come down pretty easily in counters decks, so all of that is great. The only thing it's missing is slightly stronger evasion. The fact that it mostly can't be blocked by tokens is really nice. They can't just chump this with really small stuff, but without trample it might still be difficult to get through. If you can give this trample, this is going to be sweet. Next up is Lichtor for 3 colorless and 1 green. It's a creature Tyranid with flash. It has Pheromone Trail. When Lichtor enters the battlefield, if a creature entered the battlefield under an opponent's control this turn, create a 3/3 green Tyranid warrior creature token with trample, and it's a 3/3. This is very fine, not much to say here. It's just a bit of Tyranid synergy. Next up we have Malathrope, 1 colorless, 1 green, 1 blue, creature Tyranid, 2/2 with flying and Scavenge the Dead. When it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Malathrope for each creature card exiled this way. So it seems like they're jamming every effect that's good in Commander into these precons. Graveyard Hate on a very passable body is awesome, and it's also going to grow when it exiles creatures from the graveyard. This is just fantastic, and it should go in every Simic deck going forward, or at least any deck that cares even remotely about counters. Next up is Morlock for X colorless, 1 red, 1 green. It's a creature Tyranid. It has Ravenous and Terror from the Deep. When Morlock enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature and opponent's control. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So not much to say here. You need to sink a lot of mana into this for it to be good, but it's a 2-for-1 if you do. It's fine. Next up we have Goliath Truck. It's a 4 colorless artifact vehicle for a 4-4 with stowage. Whenever it attacks, put 2+1/+1 counters on another target attacking creature and crew 2. Not much to say here at all, just a good attacking vehicle for vehicle decks. Next up is Pure Strain Gene Stealer for 2 colorless, 1 green. It's a creature Tyranid, 1/1, and it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it, so it enters at a 3/3. And it has Vanguard Species. Whenever it attacks, you may remove a +1/+1 counter from it. If you do, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle. So this is a nice variation of the Fertilid kind of effect. It requires you to attack, so it has to stay alive 1 turn, and it's a little bit slow. But that being said, you can get multiple ramps out of this if the opponent doesn't have anything to block it with, so that can never be totally bad. Next up is Ravener for X colorless, 1 green, 1 blue. It's a creature Tyranid, a 0/0 with flash. It has Ravenous, of course. And when it enters the battlefield, target creature attacks target opponent this turn if able. This is a really sweet one for shenanigans. You can just flash it in during your opponent's turn and make their Voltron commander attack the player of your choice instead of yourself. This can do a lot of stuff, and if you have a way to flicker it, it can be super good. And you can just cast it for 2, actually. Even if it dies immediately, you still get the enter the battlefield trigger. So this is kind of cool because you can reuse it. Flickering it doesn't work very well because it has 0 toughness by itself, but if you have a way to boost the power of toughness, you can even flicker it and kind of prevent a lot of damage to yourself. It's very sweet. And finally we have Atalant Jackal for 1 colorless, 1 red and 1 green. It's a creature human Tyranid scout with trample haste. It's a 2/2. Skilled Outrider. Whenever Atalant Jackal deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle. So this is very similar to the previous one. I think this deck is going to need a lot of ramp for all the X cost cards. So this is providing that if you can get in. If you get it down early, it's really good because they're probably not going to have that many blockers. Later in the game, this can be a pretty awkward top deck. So that has been all for our second batch of Warhammer 40k spoilers. What do you think? Are there any exciting cards that you can't wait to brew with? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them. And if you like this video, don't forget to click like and or subscribe. I'm growing the channel right now and it really helps me a lot. And until next time, take care.